For centuries, the Yakuza were the most feared criminal empire in Japan. The full-body tattoos, that rigid code of honor, it was all legendary. But get this, today, they're nearly extinct. So what happened? Who or what took them down? Let's dig in.
So, who do you think did it? A huge police takedown? Maybe a rival gang war? Nope. The answer is, well, it's pretty wild. The Yakuza were basically taken out by a generation that was armed with smartphones, not swords or guns.
And this right here? This is the core of the whole thing. On one side, you've got the Yakuza world. Absolute loyalty, strict hierarchy. You do what you're told. On the other, Gen Z. All about autonomy, being flexible, living a digital life. So this isn't just some crime story. It's really about how an ancient, hardcore code just became totally obsolete when faced with a modern way of thinking. Okay, but before we get into how they fell apart, we've got to understand how they got so powerful to begin with. I mean, how did they build an empire that seemed completely untouchable? We're talking about a tradition that goes back more than 300 years. It was all built on this idea of absolute, unquestioning loyalty to a boss, the Oyabun. And the members, the Kobun, which actually means children, they had to prove their loyalty in some pretty extreme ways. Like yubitsume, yeah, that's the ritual where they'd literally chop off part of their own finger to atone for a mistake. It was a world of super strict rules and, honestly, brutal rituals. So even though the tradition was ancient, one particular gang really came to define the Yakuza in modern times. That was the Yamaguchi-gumi. And, they started out super small back in 1915, just a bunch of port workers. After World War II, they started getting bigger, taking over construction jobs, nightlife. But their massive leap to power, that came from a really, really surprising ally. Yep, the CIA. No joke. See, after the war, the US was absolutely terrified that communism would take over Japan, so they looked at the Yakuza and saw a tool. A violent but useful tool. They literally armed them and pointed them at their political enemies. This basically put the Yakuza on steroids, transforming them from a local gang into a true national powerhouse. So, with that kind of backing from the US government, plus a death grip on the Japanese economy, the Yakuza basically became the country's shadow rulers. They were, in many ways, even more powerful than the actual government. And the scale of that power was just staggering. At their peak, we're talking the early 1960s, the Yakuza had 200,000 members. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that was more people than in the entire official Japanese army at the time. Wild, right? And their reach was just immense. They had their hooks in 36 out of Japan's 47 districts. They were running the obvious stuff, drug smuggling, extortion, but also, get this, talent agencies for movie stars and singers. They were literally everywhere. And of course, all that control meant unbelievable amounts of money. We're talking an estimated $10 billion a year, and that's back in the 1950s. Their influence ran so deep that they actually got one of their own guys, Nobusuke Kishi, into the prime minister's office in 1955. Just incredible. But here's where the story takes a really weird turn. You'd think everyone would hate them, right? But for a long time, a lot of the public saw them as a kind of necessary evil. See, after the Yakuza helped the police take down a rival foreign gang, they were seen as these nationalist heroes, protecting Japanese tradition. It's crazy. But in one police survey, 1 out of every 10 people said they actually thought Japan needed the Yakuza to maintain order. So yeah, they looked completely invincible, but as it so often happens, the very things that made them so powerful, that violence and greed, were about to become their downfall. They were about to turn the whole country against them. The big turning point was something called the Yamaichi War. After their leader died in '81, a super brutal internal gang war just exploded. We're talking over 200 armed shootings spilling onto the streets in the '80s. Now, you gotta remember, Japan has almost no gun violence, so this was absolutely terrifying for the public. Suddenly, the Yakuza weren't protectors anymore. They were just a menace. So that public gang war was like the first big crack in the armor. Then, Japan hit a massive economic recession. And what did the Yakuza do? They kept shaking down businesses that were already struggling. That pretty much erased any goodwill they had left. And the final nail in the coffin, they flooded the country with synthetic drugs, which kicked off this huge crisis of drug abuse among young people. After that, any heroic image they had was just gone, shattered for good. Okay, so now the government finally has the public on its side, and they start cracking down. and cracking down hard. But the final blow, the one that really finished them off, it wasn't a police raid or a long prison sentence. It was something much quieter and much bigger, a massive cultural shift.
So first, the government basically turned them into social ghosts. These new laws came out in 2011 that just cut them off from modern life. If you were a known Yakuza member, you couldn't get a bank account, no credit card, couldn't even get a phone contract or rent an apartment. You were basically erased from the entire modern economy.
And that led directly to their biggest problem of all. Take a look at the Yakuza today. More than half of all members are over 50. Only about 5% are in their 20s. The organization is literally dying of old age. Why? Because nobody wants to join anymore. And I mean, think about it. Why would they? If you're part of Gen Z, raised on the internet, this whole Yakuza thing sounds like a terrible deal. Sacrifice your freedom, your whole identity, for the good of the group? In a world that's all about individualism and digital freedom? No way. Their entire code, their entire reason for being, just became obsolete.
So, the Yakuza started to fade away. But crime itself didn't vanish. Of course not. It just evolved. It changed into something new. And you could argue something even more dangerous.
This is what organized crime looks like in Japan today. You see these anonymous ads on social media for yami baito, which means dark part-time jobs. These new gangs called tokuryu use them to recruit young people online for one-off crimes, like a smash-and-grab robbery for a big payout. There's no loyalty, no tattoos, no lifelong commitment. It's just a quick gig for a quick payday. And the difference between the old way and the new way is just stark. The Yakuza had this rigid hierarchy. Everyone knew who they were. These new tokuryu guys, they're decentralized and totally anonymous. You're not making a lifelong blood oath to join. You're just answering an ad for a part-time gig. And the whole motive? It's not about power or tradition. It's just about getting that fast, untraceable cash. So when you look at the whole story, the Yakuza weren't defeated in some big, dramatic battle. There was no final showdown. Japan's Gen Z didn't have to fight them. They just made them irrelevant. They basically ignored them into extinction. And it just goes to show, in our modern world, maybe the most powerful weapon of all is irrelevance. And that leaves us with a really fascinating and, kind of terrifying question. The story of the Yakuza is this incredible lesson in how even the biggest, most powerful empires can fall. Not with a loud bang, but with the quiet swipe of a smartphone screen. So it makes you wonder, what happens when the criminals of tomorrow don't need an organization or a name or even a face to operate?